Okay, good morning, everyone. My name is Beth Boland. I am the chair of the New England chapter of NACD. We'll just give folks a minute or so to gather before we start. We're expecting a big crowd today, so we'll give them a chance to get here this early in the morning. In the meantime, feel free to chat amongst yourselves, and we'll get started with the program momentarily. Okay, I see more and more people starting to populate the screen. We have our speakers here, and let's get started. Again, welcome. My name is Beth Boland, chair of the New England chapter of NACD. We are delighted to have you all here this morning, although perhaps a little less delighted than if we could see you in person and get together in person. As you all know, this September program is our kickoff program every year. We look forward to it so much. We always feature leading CEOs within the New England area, and more importantly, people who we believe truly have a vision and are compelling speakers that kicks us off for a program every year in September. Unfortunately, this year we are still on Zoom. Trust me, we tried very, very hard to see whether we could get everyone in person or even a small group of folks in person, but for safety reasons for this year, we decided that we'd once again be virtual. Next year, I am praying and hoping, as we all are, that we will all be here in person and be able to enjoy the remarks of our visionaries in person as well, and to see each other. So this morning, we are delighted to have three visionaries, CEOs of Panera Bread, of Eastern Bank, of Perkin Elmer, and our moderator, Cathy Minehan, who is the president of our chapter. Before we start, a few housekeeping items. One of the things that we love to have is, in the absence of having everyone in person, if you could just put yourself on screen as opposed to off screen, at least it creates a little bit more of a sense of who we have in the audience and that sense of intermingling. You should, however, put yourselves on mute. I think that we have a little bit of background noise, so hopefully everybody will be able to put themselves on mute now. And when you have questions, feel free to pop them into the chat room at any point. You don't need to leave that until the end. At the end of this, we will be asking you, as everybody does, for a survey. We really do take into account those comments for our survey or from our survey. So your voice counts. Make sure that you fill that out. No program that we put on, including today's program, would be possible without the awesome support of our sponsors. And we really, really appreciate how our sponsors have stuck with us and seen the value of NACD's programming, even in the virtual world. This is the list of our chapter sponsors. And this morning in particular, we want to thank Morgan Lewis, Protivity, and RSM, who have been with us for many, many years. Fantastic organizations, fantastic sponsors, and we really, truly do thank you. With that, let's get on to the program. I'd like to introduce the moderator of the program, who is a visionary herself, and she has spoken on several of these programs as one of the panelists. Cathy Minehan is the president of our organization, but notwithstanding that, she is a fantastic moderator and truly a pioneer herself. She spent 39 years in the Federal Reserve System. She was the first woman to be president and CEO of the Federal Reserve Boston. Currently, she is a director of several publicly traded corporations. Over the past 12 years, she has been a board member of Becton Dickinson, Mass Mutual, Visa and is currently a director at Bright Horizons and a trustee of the MITRE Corporation and the Brookings Institution. She also serves on many very large and very influential nonprofit boards and is truly a treasure to have for our organization and also for the program this morning. So with that, I'll kick it off to you, Cathy.
Thanks so much, Beth. I think I'm going to bring you to every program I moderate from here on in. That was a great intro. Thanks a lot. As Beth mentioned, the Visionaries program is an important start to the year for NACD New England. And we really miss the fact that we can't see all of you in person. When we were first planning this Visionaries program, I thought we'd be out of the pandemic, or at least on the way out of it. And I planned to ask the standard questions about where our visionaries see their businesses going. But the fact that this program is virtual rather than in person, rather than the gathering we had planned and hoped for, and frankly, very much looking forward to, is a statement in itself. Things are not back to normal, and we don't know when they're going to be. That said, I am going to start off with a question about how our panelists see their industries moving forward. And we're so fortunate to have CEO panelists in three very distinct industries: in banking, in consumer products, and in technology, particularly healthcare technology. Let me start by introducing them in alphabetical order. First is Niren Chaudhary. He has more than 25 years of international corporate leadership experience in the food, retail, and hospitality industry. He's CEO of the recently formed Panera Brands, which includes Caribou Coffee, Einstein Brothers Bagels, and Panera Bread. Niren joined Panera from Krispy Kreme Donuts, where he had served as Chief Operating Officer and President of the International Division. And then he had been 23 years prior to that at Yum Brands. So this enormous experience in Niren's head about the consumer products industry and how it's facing the challenges of coming out of the pandemic, hopefully. Bob Rivers, Chair and CEO of the Board of Directors of Eastern Bank. It's got about $17 billion in assets. It's the largest locally based retail bank in Massachusetts, more than 110 locations and 1,900 employees. Eastern held its initial public offering last fall in October, so it's now a publicly traded company. Bob began his banking career in 1986, working with several banks before joining Eastern in 2006. He became president in 2007, and now, as I said, is CEO and chair. Bob is known around town as a passionate and visionary leader, and he has been chair of the Boston, I'm gapping here, Bob. Massachusetts Business Roundtable, yes. He's been chair of that for several years and leading that with a great deal of vision. And that's been a great group through the pandemic with weekly meetings, bringing everybody together to talk about how business is doing in Massachusetts. So we owe him a debt of gratitude for that. And finally, Dr. Prahlad Singh, CEO of Perkin Elmer. He has 25 years of experience, over 25 years experience in healthcare technologies. He's a CEO of Perkin Elmer, as I said, and has held several roles since 2014. He sits on the company's board of directors as well. Prior to joining Perkin Elmer, Prahlad was general manager of GE's healthcare women's health division, responsible for mammography and bone densitometry. He's also held senior level positions in strategy, business development, mergers and acquisitions at both GE Healthcare and Philips Healthcare. So we are really fortunate to have three real visionaries in three very distinct businesses: consumer products, banking, and healthcare technologies. So without further ado, let me ask, since I finished with you, Prahlad, let me start with you. how do you see the business going forward in the healthcare technology sector? And what are you thinking about for 2022?
Thank you, Cathy. Good morning, everyone. The business, if you look at it from a healthcare technology perspective, it's very much in a flux. Because if you think about it from a perspective of as we've coming through the pandemic, research labs, academia, pharma, biotech, all of these are open for business, especially from a research and a manufacturing perspective. So, I would say that research is probably on a much higher pace than even what we were in 2019 prior to the pandemic. Overall, but at the same time, it's in pockets. If you look at it in Europe, in the European continent, there are still some countries where there is a curb on what's going on in terms of movement, in terms of how people are interacting, in terms of stacking how work is done. And similarly in Asia, with the second wave in India, for example, or in China, if there is suddenly a flare up on a city or an area where they just shut it down. So it's a very dynamic situation. And if you ask me the same question a week later or a week before, the answer would probably be very different. So we just continue to live in a world of flux and dynamism, which I don't think is going to slow down for several weeks or quarters.
Niren, what's it look like on the consumer side?
Good morning, everybody. Real pleasure to be here. So I have to say I'm an optimist. We have at Panera Bread embraced the current situation, difficult as it is, with the mindset of how can we become stronger? How do we reinvent ourselves and continue to be relevant as the needs change or consumer needs change around us? So the Panera brand business is actually doing very well and is coming out quite strongly through the pandemic. However, if you step back, I would describe the economy as somewhat being in shock. It's like it's the readjustment of the demand and the supply, and the demand is coming in quite strong and the supply is kind of lagging behind, and therefore there's a lot of friction out there, and probably one of the most difficult operating environments that I have been in recent times. Disruptions in supply chain, disruptions on availability of people, you see that everywhere. So as we look ahead into 2022, I continue to be very optimistic that we will get to the other side of this. It's a bit more prolonged than one would like, but we will eventually get there. I feel very optimistic and bullish about the demand side of the equation for the following reasons. I think on the demand side, there's actually a consolidation happening in our food retail industry. So there are fewer players available as in terms of choice for our consumers. But this is what consumers are looking for in food retail. They're looking for brands that serve good food that is also good for you. Consumers are looking for brands that are very convenient in terms of being able to access through omni-channel. They're looking for brands that have digital e-commerce access. And finally, they're looking for brands that also believe in having an impact agenda of doing good in this world. That's what I see on the consumer side, on the demand side of the equation. On the supply side, however, I think there's an adjustment phase that is happening where the demand has come in so strong that we're unable to cope in terms of just the availability of talent, the availability of commodities and products on the supply chain. And therefore, there is a spike in terms of inflation and near-term shortages of all of our inputs that I talked about. However, I see that as an adjustment phase, and I feel by the middle of 2022, hopefully that should actually square off, and we should be in a far more stable environment to continue to build the business as we go forward.
I think you should, look into the Federal Reserve as a possible next step for your future career, Niren, because you're sounding a lot like the thoughtful people on the Federal Reserve board about inflation how temporary it is, the mixing and matching of supply and demand. I'm sure you're seeing that in your business, Bob.
Oh, absolutely. So good morning, everyone. It's great to be here. Cathy, thanks for the introduction. Niren, Prahlad, it's great to be with you both and meet you at least virtually. Certainly, as I think about the banking industry, like many sectors of the economy, the pandemic has only accelerated trends that have been underway for a long time. A couple of them in banking are, first, margin compression. That is the spread between what we earn on loans and pay on deposits. That's been in a long-term secular decline. And it's certainly under a lot of pressure now and accelerated by the pandemic. So again, margins have been coming in for decades in this business for a whole bunch of reasons. One of them being technology, which is the other trend I'll talk about. But in terms of what we're seeing in terms of margins, obviously in the pandemic, as economic activity really collapsed and has been slowly rebounding, there's been a lot of stimulus in the economy that has kept rates low. It's built a lot of liquidity on bank balance sheets. And because of the uncertainty, you've got a lot of people that are really hesitant to deploy that liquidity, whether they be consumers or businesses. We see it on the loan side in the same way. A lot of businesses, again, are hoarding that liquidity, not borrowing, not taking down their lines. And even those that do want to borrow and can't expand their business, they're dealing with labor shortages that inhibit their ability to expand their businesses. So again, this has been a long-term secular and cyclical decline. And the other one is technology. Certainly, as we had to close branches outright at some points in the pandemic in limited hours, people learned to use digital tools in a way that they haven't had to in the past. Many estimates is the acceleration of digital in banking has been 5 years within the last year and a half. And certainly we see it in our business in terms of traffic in the branches and the demand for those tools. Again, that's not a new trend. The race in technology, the demand for those tools by our customers has only been growing, and your need to have them and need to have them competitively has only increased over time. It's really because of the margin pressure and the need for technology that drove us to go public after being a mutual company for over 200 years. We also wanted to participate in the consolidation we see. It seems that every day when we pick up the newspaper, there's another large regional bank that has been acquired or merged with another. And that's all a function of these trends. The need for scale in order to compete and be able to invest in technology in particular, as well as the talent to support it, has never been greater. And again, the pandemic really hasn't changed the state of play in banking, but boy, it's really moved it along, and we see it all around us right now.
So I see three kind of common elements here, whether you're talking healthcare technologies, consumer banking, you've got supply demand imbalances, you've got the impact of technology, which we've had to use during this time of turmoil during the pandemic, but is going to teach us how to do things differently in the future. And you've got the play between what's normal, the old normal during the pandemic, and what's going to be transformative for the future, and how soon we get into that transformative stage. Prahlad, if we could go back a little bit to the healthcare technologies and talk a little bit about dislocation in your own company during the pandemic and how you see that playing out in the future. Have you seen the supply demand issues that both Niren and Bob talked about?
Very much so. For the audience, those who are not aware, Perkin Elmer is an 80-year-old company in the New England area. And most of our focus has been in the diagnostics and life sciences arena. So, just sort of going back about 18 months ago when the pandemic first hit, we started our work on developing a PCR test for COVID-19. And because of our internal quality threshold, we were not the first ones out to get approval. But if you go to the FDA website, our test is ranked #1 in terms of its sensitivity. Now, along with that came a demand aspect of it. No, and the tests were manufactured in one particular region. Generally, as with most corporations, over the past decade, companies have centralized manufacturing in one location from where they distribute worldwide. Well, COVID-19 took that theory and threw it out of the window, because not only supply chain redundancy became very important and relevant in terms of regulatory hurdles, in terms of availability of people who were not testing positive, and talent and workforce. But the thing that became so telling is, for most of these tests, and folks who have gone through chemistry undergrad and science background, you have plastic tips that you need for pipetting, right? And plastic tips is the most commoditized product that you could ever imagine. And the number one thing that had the least availability and people were fighting and hoarding and putting it in inventory were plastic tips. Now, 2 years ago, no one would have ever imagined that something that costs a penny to make or less than a penny to make would be the most sought after item. So that is the impact from a supply demand perspective, to what Niren and Bob were pointing out, is it became important and relevant. So the lessons learned from Perkin Elmer's perspective and most of the company's perspective is, how do you ensure speed of mobilization? How, from, logistics, manufacturing, shipping, freight, speed of mobilization is so relevant and important in today's world. And this is something that's going to stay with us, forever. So just sort of, to give one example is, as we've come through this piece, through this pandemic, supply chain redundancy and speed of mobilization are two aspects that become very important, especially in the, the core manufacturing segment.
Yeah. The big mantra was for a long time, just in time.
Yeah.
Slim down everything to do with the supply chain and only bring things forward when you needed it. You probably had that in mind with your consolidation of manufacturing. That had to change overnight almost.
Literally not just on and it changed every week. It's not that it changed overnight, it again changed. Because, say, for example, you're manufacturing in China, and either due to government regulations or due to the pandemic or infection, you needed to pivot to Europe or you needed to pivot to US. So it continues to be that situation, unfortunately, in some parts of the world. But, I think companies have become very, overnight have built the expertise, as this has gone through to deal with the situations like these.
Have you seen that much change in the consumer side? I mean, you talked a bit about transformation, Niren, but you also talked about it kind of getting back to normal somewhere in 22. Have you seen this supply chain disruption?
Yeah, I was just thinking about when the pandemic began about 1.5 years ago, we were absolutely hammered. We lost half of our business almost overnight. And then we had to quickly reinvent ourselves. So we simplified the brand in terms of our menu. We went more aggressively off-premise, which means, delivery and drive-throughs and so on, convenience, and then rapidly went after technology and e-commerce and so on. And then innovated, launched some exciting new products. I hope all of you have tried them. The flatbread pizza. I can't help but making a pitch on how great our products are. And our coffee subscription.
Everybody's hungry at this time of the morning anyway.
And our coffee subscription, particularly appropriate at this time of the morning. So by doing all of that, those 4 things, our business has really sort of, come back strong, as I was saying. However, what's happened is, now we suddenly are confronted with this complete absence of talent. And I'm sure you're familiar with this. And this talent actually is behind everything: supply chain disruptions, non-availability of people. And what I don't understand is that we have, on the one hand, 11 million jobs in the economy, but you also have 8 million people unemployed at the same time. And, and I've been scratching my head and wondering, why is that? And I think it's a combination of reasons. One, I think there is fear about the Delta variant and people don't feel safe coming back to work. I think it's the employment stimulus to some extent. And then people are also just so tired and exhausted. They're reevaluating their lives and options as to where they want to work and so on. So a combination of those reasons is keeping people away from the workforce. So imagine that gap, 8 million people unemployed, 11 million jobs are required. So how that is hitting us is that we just don't have people at a time when our business is just taking off, So it is a significant challenge. So what's happening right now is we have too many new people who are not properly trained, trying to manage these stores and are getting absolutely stressed out. It's like very, very hard out there. And there's also, I think our consumers are also getting tired of all these restrictions. There's impatience there. It's almost like a cocktail of difficulty of just operating in this environment. So I think at Panera, we always have this mindset of, okay, that's fine, but what can we do? How do we attack it with what's within our control? And we're doing a bunch of things. One is three things in particular in the near term. One is that, obviously dialing up our communication, inspiring and engaging with our associates, letting them know how much we appreciate what they're doing every single day. But that's obviously not enough. The second thing is we're putting tons of investment in terms of providing adequate management cover, providing the leaders the time to train, properly and get on top of the situation, and then creating retention bonuses and recognition awards, etc. So we're doing that in the near term. However, I think this has again begun, like Bob was saying, some of these changes were in the making. They've just got accelerated through the pandemic. I think this employee value proposition, that are we the best employers, has also been in the making across the industries and has got accelerated. Mm-hmm. And the reason why 8 million employees are refusing to come back to work is because they don't think that, potentially we have the right employee value proposition for them to be excited. And therefore it is upon us as leaders of businesses to create a value proposition that can take care of them, not in terms of just the hygiene needs of, compensation, etc., but something more meaningful, development, growth from within, purpose, and all that other stuff. So we are also thinking very hard about how can we make Panera Brands the employer of choice for the future, so that we are enough of a magnet for people to come and work for us, so that if they ever want to work in food retail, they should only want to work at one of our brands. So that's our mindset with which we're attacking it, and hoping to actually get stronger because of this near-term issues.
Yeah,
that's fascinating, Niren. And one thing that it really brings to mind is the increased focus on the part of whether it be investment banks or stock evaluators, the elements of E, S, and G in terms of corporate governance, whether it's environmental, social, and certainly governance aspects. I know Bob has been very, very much involved in thinking about how, in particular, the S part of that works, DEI and everything that goes into that, which is part of how people see their workplaces these days. Are people being treated well? Are they being treated equally? Are there equal chances and so forth? I know Bob is articulate on this beyond belief. Maybe you might want to talk a little bit about the employee situation as you see it, Bob.
Sure, thanks, Cathy. And so much of what Niren said really resonates with me. No surprise, his business structurally is very similar to ours, bifurcated workforce in this sense. We've got 40% of our people that have been out there working in their offices on what we call our front lines every day in our branches, insurance offices, and a few other critical functions. And the other 60% are working from home. So the experience, very different. The issues very different with respect to those employee groups. But at core, the value proposition is the same. And I think, Cathy, the social issues, if you will, are certainly core to that. They've always been something that has been core to Eastern for a very long period of time, and those that we've focused on for many, many years, but now they're more resonant than ever. And like every other company I know, we're leaning in harder than we ever have before. I think it's one of the many ways that this time gives us the opportunity to be a better employer. We haven't set a date of when we were going to return for those that are working from home, that is, for over a year. And the reason for that is we really wanted to wallow in this moment, if you will. This was a huge change for us, as it was for, again, most other companies I know. We very much had an in-person culture. We had no work from home really whatsoever. The few that received it, you had to be, a top performer. It had to be temporary. It was offered on sort of double secret probation. You couldn't tell anyone. And now it's become really a way of life for all of those positions that can be done from home. I think that's a good thing. I think it's a good thing in terms of the value proposition we offer to people to get them off the roads, bring more flexibility to their lives. And again, it's one of those many things that we weren't focused on, unlike the social issues, unlike DEI, that we're now focusing on more than ever. So again, I think it's for so many different reasons and all the forces that are converging in this moment, a very exciting time and a tremendous opportunity for us, and again, so many, to really reflect on some of the things that perhaps we haven't paid attention to as much in the past, and really make a strong commitment to them and in a meaningful way. The mantra that we've had at our company really since the very beginning, when we were founded, was right and smart. And we do the things that we do because first and foremost, we believe that they're the right thing to do. But we also make sure that they're the smart thing to do too for the business. And in so many ways, whether it be addressing racial inequities, gender inequities, other disparities, of which there are many throughout the business community and certainly in banking, to the extent that we address those, again, that's good for business. It makes us a better employer. It allows us to attract a wider range of talent and more talent, particularly at a time when it's hard to find employees to fill some of these positions that we're trying to fill. So again, lots of challenges, but I couldn't agree more with the optimism of both Prahlad and Niren at this time. And again, very, very exciting.
It's quite interesting, the similarities, particularly in terms of people and what you need to do to keep people. Have you seen that too, Prahlad?
As we've all heard about this term called the Great Resignation, it's, I think as Bob and Niren pointed out, the workforce and the employee base, especially coming out of this pandemic, is looking for a purpose. And I think you can provide the right compensation piece, and you can provide the right financial benefits, but that's become baseline now. No, that is not a competitive advantage in attracting talent. It is what you heard from Bob and Niren, is what is the other stuff around it? Why am I going to work literally, virtually, or remotely? What am I doing? Why am I doing it? And do I have the flexibility to be able to do it from wherever I want? I think those are the three elements that the workforce, especially the younger workforce, is looking for. I mean, you hear of companies having an attrition rate in 20-25%. That used to be unheard of.
Yeah.
But and attrition rates in the double digits has become commonplace now. So, but I think from a company perspective, especially for us, Perkin Elmer, which is in the healthcare space and life sciences, we are fortunate to be in the New England arena, where there's boatload of talent from all the universities coming out. So you have to go much earlier, to the undergrads and start providing internship programs, start providing, some summer internships, etc., for them to come and see what's happening in the lab and why this is important and relevant. Our mission is around innovating for a healthier world. We do newborn screening. Every newborn baby is touched by us for testing as soon as they are born.
Mm.
Once you provide a purpose, once they see the passion as to why it is important and relevant as a company to work for, it acts as a catalyst. But that is the piece where where companies have to work much harder on rather than just the financial piece of the compensation.
That's an interesting perspective. How do you handle the difference between the people who do have the luxury of working from home potentially, or taking an internship? I know some young people whose internships have been completely virtual and have ended up in jobs, and it has worked beautifully. But then I think about the people lower down who are becoming hard to get to, who can't do anything virtual, have to be there each and every day, are faced with a lot of challenges getting there each and every day. You're in so many different countries, both Prahlad, and I know you are, Niren too, Bob, more locally here. How are you seeing that what could shape up as a real problem within an organization between those who do have flexibility and those who don't?
Absolutely. I think, there is also a practical aspect to it, Cathy, right? In a lot of countries, people don't have the flexibility to be able to work from home.
Yeah.
They need to get to an office, right? They need to be able to get to a place from where they can work. So, again, it's got to be very dynamic. And this is where the HR community and the workforce enablement piece from an HR perspective has become very important and relevant. And again, the script is still being written. I think the paint is still very wet on how this is going to evolve. But being able to provide flexibility from an ability to be able to work from home, and even if they are working from home, do they have the tools? Do they have the wherewithal? How do we ensure that that's practical? So the practical aspects have become as important as the well-being and the mental health aspect of it. So the spectrum is so wide that you have to tackle and deal on it on an operational basis as much on a strategic basis.
Are you seeing that too, Niren, between those who can come in and those who have some options?
Yeah, I think it's such an important topic. Let me just step back in terms of why this is important, whether working from home or being together. I really believe that companies can achieve results by having a great strategy that's well executed. Execution is even more important than the strategy, as we know, and that in turn is a function of your culture, right? And I have a belief that's very difficult in a food retail business to build a culture without being able to see each other, meet each other, physically be with each other. It's so difficult. So fortunately, I think because we have food retail cafes across the 10 odd countries in which we operate, our associates have to be in the cafes and be with our consumers. That's understood. But I think in the office, I really believe that whilst flexibility is important, I don't think there is any substitute for people being together and building that collective energy and commitment, intentionality to really execute what needs to be done and have a sense of winning together. I think we in this, because we've been doing this virtual world thing for quite a while, I think we think that this is the new norm and that it is in some ways perhaps better, but let's not forget that there is a lot of anxiety in this world. There's a lot of lack of connection that people feel. They're burnt out, they feel exhausted, and they're not being nurtured, in terms of their human emotion. So there are many things that are not working with this flexibility. So And I feel that it can, therefore there's a need in all of us. We're social animals. We want to be with each other. I think we get better when we're with each other. But our take is that we don't want to force or mandate anything. We want to make our offices so damn good that people want to come there because they have more fun. It is more energizing. It's more inspiring. It's more exciting. So we're working on that. We're actually, as we speak, building a new office in Newton. And it's going to be ready by the end of the year, beginning of next year. And that's the mindset. We want to make the office so good and a physical manifestation of the brand and the future that we're trying to build that people will just love to be there. So I think, and through that, I'm hoping that with some passage of time, people will discover the magic of just being with each other and want to get back to how it once was.
No, I think that's well said, Niren. I mean, certainly there's many benefits to being in this virtual world, but you have to do some things differently. And you said this earlier. It requires us as leaders, as managers, to interact with our teams in a different way when it's fully virtual. We've got to be more proactive in reaching out. We've got to find ways to bridge this gap where we can't be in person. But not all of those things can be solved. I mean, certainly there's a schism. I think about certainly those that are in the field at our company. Generally folks that are on average lower paid than those who are working from home. There's a real schism. They're taking the most risk. They're bearing the most burden. They're dealing with the traffic and all of the challenges that we had pre-pandemic around childcare and dropping off kids and all of that. It remains for them where it's been alleviated for everyone working from home by and large. So that is certainly how do we continue to communicate? And that's one of the things that I'm highly sensitive over the last 18 months is remembering that we do have 40% of our folks in the field, that their experience really hasn't changed. And because what I find a lot of my colleagues doing is forgetting about them in this way, because we're in this grand social experience and it's very exciting to think about what the future will be around the office and what form it will take. And that requires a lot of energy and good thought, and it's fun. But we have to remember that those that are in the field don't have those opportunities available to them. So we have to think about how do we make those opportunities available to them? How does some of that flexibility transfer to them? The other issue I certainly see in terms of the downsides is those that are just joining the company, particularly those out of college. My daughter just graduated from Georgetown and is working with Deloitte in DC, and it's great. But it's still virtual in some ways, like most companies. And there's a disconnection there. And even though she was used to virtual in college for the last year and a half at Georgetown, there's still that desire for social connection. She went to the office, Deloitte's offices in DC this week, and was sending us all pictures how thrilled she was to be in those environs. And I'm mindful that we have a lot of young people in our company too, that we've got to find a way to scratch that itch, to engage them better. Otherwise, switching a job will just be a matter of hitting a different link on a Zoom screen. We've got to find ways to overcome that. And then the last group, of course, we've got a lot of long-term employees here, and that's been key to us and a real benefit to us, but they're tired. I think any of us who have engaged in the Zoom life, as I do, in some ways it's easier, right? You don't go anywhere. You don't deal with traffic. You're not racing and stressing about, am I going to be there on time? But it's exhausting because you jump from one screen to another, and it's just not a natural state. So we've had a lot of our long-term employees who are just burned out. In addition to all that everyone else is going through, we're doing the biggest acquisition in our history by a factor of 5. We're still standing up a public company. All those work streams really have people just wiped out. And in this reevaluation of what am I going to do with the rest of my life, many of them are now retiring. That's not a good thing for a company that relies on heavy institutional knowledge to solve some of these challenges and really mentor and train and coach that next generation that in many cases they still have never met in person. So again, I think remote on balance has been a great thing. I really do. I think it'll make us more efficient in the future in a whole bunch of ways. But make no mistake, continuing in this state purely is certainly not optimal.
Just as a matter of convenience here, could people mute themselves? Obviously not the speakers, because we're getting a little bit of feedback. So what I'm hearing is an enormous amount of overlap between the three industries in terms of what's really what you're facing going forward, what you think is really critical about your employee population, how to treat them, both the people who can work from home, the people who can't, the challenge of being in different countries, having different lines of business. As you look forward to 2022, what do you think are going to be the main shapers of disruption that you wouldn't have anticipated pre-pandemic, but now see clearly coming forward to your industry and others? I mean, technology has to be in an enormous state of disruption. You've talked a lot about that, Prahlad. As you look forward, calming down or continuing?
I think it's going to get on a much rapid pace. Just this week, the UN General Assembly is in session, and and one of the main topics that's there, and they have invited all the healthcare leaders, is how do we become ready for the next one? What does the how from a global surveillance monitoring perspective, the ability to, as I talked earlier around the speed of mobilization, how can companies, corporations, public sector, and governments, most importantly, be ready for what it is. Both the UK and the US governments have a 100-day mission. The flag has been planted that within 100 days, you have to have the wherewithal and the technology in place to deal with the next one. And and I think what we don't realize that this is something that we'll have to figure out how to work faster. We were very fortunate in the case of COVID-19 that we had the mRNA vaccine. That the new technology worked. Otherwise, it's never happened, and that you could have a vaccine in such a rapid pace. And then I think honestly we got lucky, because of the availability and because the SARS-CoV-2 virus was very well identified and known. But there are a whole host of viruses that are unknown. So I think as a company, and especially in the healthcare technology arena, how do we try to stay 2 steps ahead from a technology perspective? So technology disruption is a key aspect as we look into the future. And the second aspect, again, is more around genomics. I think genomics plays a very important role, not in just the terms of identifying diseases, but more importantly around targeted therapies and treatment. But the cost of that needs to come down. The cost of enabling testing, easy access to high quality testing and therapy is going to become very relevant and important. So there are a lot of technology disruptors that I could list out. Another one is around artificial intelligence, data gathering. I mean, data, irrespective of any industry, whether it's Bob's or Niren's or mine, is so relevant and so important, and will continue to be more and more important. So the partnership between artificial intelligence, data companies, and technology is going to be more relevant and important for all of us.
As we look at it and think about the rapidity with which we went from plain old COVID-19 to the Delta variant, and everybody talking about how many other variants, and you've referenced that there may be out there just in that one line. Do we ever get back to a position where we're not anticipating getting sick every moment?
I'm going to steal Niren's line, as he said earlier in the morning. I'm an eternal optimist. And I think we all should be. I think we should all be very proud of our innovation capability in the United States. We've got the best innovators in the world in any field and in industry. I think what we've been able to do, again, this was once in a generation, hopefully, but I think I have a lot of confidence and faith that this is something that we will at least be on par or ahead of.
So you see with perhaps an expansion of vaccination that a year from now we'll be actually together at this program and not wearing masks and so forth?
No, I became, I was COO of Perkin Elmer in 2019. I became CEO on December 29th of 2019.
Timing is everything, right?
4 weeks into my role, the pandemic hit. And then I think 2 weeks after that, I realized that I'm never going to make long-term, assumptions around what the world is going to look like, Cathy. I think we can, again, all be very optimistic that life, go back and look at where we were 4 weeks ago, 4 months ago. And I think there's a lot of good progress. Vaccination is very important. And I think I just wish that everyone is vaccinated, that everyone that is able to is vaccinated. And I think if we are able to reach, I think life will get to as close to normal. But that doesn't take away the fact that, it's how do you address and deal with it is becoming more and more important. And I think that's the way to think of it, right? We've got to look into the future as how do we address and deal with, other endemics or epidemics that come around.
Niren, how are you seeing this?
Well, I think we'll be well past it by next year at this time. Yeah, I think that's what I believe. I think in terms of trends and what's happening as we look forward, I see technology as a way of solving problems, not an end in itself. So I think the disruptors are the changing consumer needs, and then you serve them more efficiently by using technology. So I'll give you some of the changes in needs that I see emerging on the consumer side in food retail. One is there's a very strong need of wellness holistically, given everything that we talked about, and wellness particularly with the quality of ingredients that we put into our bodies. And I think consumers are increasingly conscious, aware, and they want to eat better. So that's an undeniable trend. A second one is that I want to have what I want, where I want it, when I want it, how I want it. That's an undeniable trend. So I want it convenient. So it should be very easily available to me depending on my needs. And the third one is I want it personalized. I want it for me. So, like they say, consumer segment is equal to one. Like, we want you as a brand to talk to me as an individual and understand me and serve me better. So these three, I think, are major disruptors. And I think technology is a way of being able to address that in a meaningful way, using data, analytics, AI, etc. So to give you some quick examples on wellness, what we're thinking of is, can we actually customize our menu choices depending on your lifestyle choice that you might have, or whatever kind of diet you choose to follow, or whatever what is important to you, you're able to see the menu only filtered through that lens using technology. I think personalization would be things like biometric identification. You walk into a Panera, and this is, by the way, a dream. So we haven't. So biometrics. So instead of giving your old-fashioned card or your phone number, you just hold up the palm of your hand, and you can identify who you are, and we can serve you in a way that's meaningful for you. I think convenience. Just like you have these at the tolls, automatic payment of your tolls using the registration number of your car. We're thinking of how can we apply that in our drive-throughs. So you just sit in your car, you come there and just drive off, and there's nothing that you need to do. So those are some examples what I mean of the disruptors are the needs, and technology is an enabler of solving those needs better than any other competition can.
No, I think that's right. I mean, Zoom's a classic example. We had a need to gather and get together when we couldn't in person, and thankfully technology like this exists. I'd never used it before the pandemic, like many people. So now we've all become kind of experts and really relied on it. And I think it's one of the many examples. You know, Cathy, as I look beyond the pandemic, and I think these forces are underway now, I think there's going to be some ways in which the economy and society will be really reshaped for the better. You know, at my office here in 265 Franklin is, in the financial district, obviously, and surrounded by definition, lots of financial services companies and office buildings who aren't there right now. And in my opinion, will never be again. They'll be in some, but if they're anything like us, they're going to shrink their space. And we're going to look to Prahlad and Niren and figure out, how do you bring your employees back? It's one of the reasons we'll probably be slower than faster, because there are reasons to bring people in. But we've got to think about what those are. How often? What hours? Again, the traffic, as we well know, is back. We're not all back in our offices, but the traffic's back in a big way. And if we are or attempt to, it'll be worse than we've ever seen. And that's going to drive people back into their homes. So I think we have to be really thoughtful about those of us who really can do our jobs 100% remotely, but see the need and the value to come in person to figure out how is that structured. But I think bottom line, no matter what form that takes, it means less office usage, at least for businesses like ours in banking and financial services. But that's already being rapidly supplanted by bioscience. We had a shortage of lab space over in Cambridge. It is exploding. All the reports that we're reading of buildings that were initially conceived as office or something else are being converted to lab. That's terrific. I think that's good for the economy. And I think it's good for places like the financial district and other areas in downtown, because their employees need to be on site and they're in jobs where they can afford to live here, whereas many can't, many who can't in financial services, frankly. So I think that reshaping will be good for the economy. It has the downside of gentrification, of course. It's going to drive a lot of people out as rents and values escalate that can no longer be here. We have to solve that, or we're going to lose our entire service sector. Employees that staff Niren's locations, one just down the block from me. How do they get to work and fight through the traffic? How do they get to work when public transportation is still scary and schedules are reduced? And so I think that's another piece in the in the midst of all the silver linings of what I said. Some of the things we've got to pay attention to. I think early childhood is finally found its moment. As you know, I've been involved with a business coalition for early childhood that we stood up in February to really get business leaders engaged in these issues from an advocacy perspective and from an investment perspective to help their employees manage those challenges. These are things I've been aware of for a long time, as we all have. Again, we heard the stories of our employees and sort of accepted them as a state of fact, and gee, that's really too bad, but didn't do enough about it. Now we have an opportunity as a society, as a business community, to literally lean into that and help solve that for all. Again, that is good for the general order. It's also good for business. In too many of our businesses, very talented, up and coming women have had to check out of the workforce because of childcare needs. That's been a loss to the business in terms of that talent. And as we all strive for greater diversity in all ways, that is one that we really need to solve. We see that in banking. Most of our employees are women, yet at the top of the house, it's quite the opposite. Mm-hmm. We need to fix that. And I think early childhood is one of the many ways in which we can lean in and get this better based upon the lessons that we've learned over the last 18 months.
Yeah, Bob, you've been such a leader in all aspects of diversity, equity, and inclusion, but particularly in thinking about how to keep women in the workforce and how to progress them. And I know we all thank you for that. We've focused a lot on technology, the private sector, everything that's happening in the private sector. Without getting into politics, which is tough, I know, but without getting into politics, all of you are governmentally regulated, banking for sure, consumer for sure, technology, healthcare in particular. Are there ways in which government can help with this transformation? Just stay out of the way? I think there's a case there. But how can more proactive government, either at the local or the national level, help you?
Well, Kathy, I'll jump in first on this one. We're in a highly regulated business, and sometimes it's a real pain.
Yeah.
But on balance, it's a really good thing. I'm glad business hasn't stayed out of the way. In this moment, without the stimulus, we'd have wreckage all over the place in this society and economy. Thank God the government stepped up and leaned in. And so again, as in anything in life, nothing is perfect. And I think, myself included, would all have certain complaints where government is overreached, went too far, not stayed in their lane, et cetera. There are many examples of that. But in my own opinion, on balance, I think government involvement, support, and regulation has made our economy and our society safer and better.
Prahlad, number of different countries, a lot of different governments.
And this, could not have been more apparent than during this pandemic. Even in the healthcare side, similar to what Bob said, right? We are a very highly regulated industry, and I'm thankful for that. But I think the challenge really is that the discrepancies between country to country in terms of having to cross the regulatory hurdles is where the challenge comes in. And then I think that, if we could get some level of uniformity in terms of how products are approved between countries or in region, that would be a great help. Because, for example, in our industry, the FDA is very different than the NMPA in China, which is very different than the Ministry of Health in Japan. And you have to go through different hoops, you have to cross different hurdles in each market, in each region to get regulatory approval for your product. And, and this pandemic was a stark reminder as to how some level of uniformity between countries or regions would be very helpful.
Do you think the WHO can force that?
I think the new and energized and empowered WHO could definitely help, but the help that they could provide is more from a data perspective. For example, they've just established a Center for Pandemic and Epidemic Responses, and they are trying to create that as a data warehouse for early signals and early warnings around epidemics and pandemic. But I think corporations, countries, and governments need to really engage with it. And, and I think, just as you pointed out, we'll stay away from politics, but political scenarios change. And that, unfortunately impacts how the WHO can operate and how empowered it is.
Niren, there's a lot of consumer regulations out there, and you're in a lot of different countries. You have the same issues as Prahlad has?
I think fortunately, we're not as regulated as healthcare or the banking industry in a relative sense. And I'm with Bob that I deeply appreciate how rapidly the government moved with the CARES Act and stimulus and everything that they did to prevent small businesses from going bankrupt, providing employment assistance, stimulus, and so on. I think that was very timely, very quick, and extremely important. So I'm really grateful for that. I think I just wanted to build on something that Bob said that I feel passionately about, is about diversity and inclusion, and also climate change. I really believe that leaders have to be force multipliers of good, and they have to constantly think about an impact that goes beyond the confines of the business that they steward. They have to have a community impact. I think it is the right thing to do. And it's personally very important to me. I think it's very important to Panera Brands. And I just want to outline how we're thinking about it. So the two areas that we've picked up where we want to actually lead and make a significant difference is diversity, inclusion, and climate change. And on diversity and inclusion, our mindset is we have limited control over the world around us, but we have full control within Panera Brands. So why can't we make Panera a shining example of the world that we wish to see? Because we can make that happen. A world that is inclusive, embracing, tolerant, respectful, and is encourages all kinds of diversity, race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, whatever it is, that we are like a proud melting pot of differences, and also differences in thinking and thought. So to encourage that, apart from what everybody does, which is representation, like do we have enough gender representation, ethnicity representation? I think it's a good thing to do, but it's kind of a hygiene level. The second one that Bob talked about is very important, is representation at the top of the pyramid, or the bottom of the pyramid, depending on how you look at the pyramid. And then I think the third one is where I have tremendous amount of passion for, is coming up with ways to provide generational progress to those who come from underprivileged backgrounds and accelerate that. So one of the things that we're looking at is, because success is a function of capability and opportunity. And very often, children and talent from underprivileged backgrounds do not have that opportunity. They're very capable, but just don't get a break in life. And we are thinking through, how can Panera give a break to those who deserve it? For example, could we create a path to ownership for some of our most talented kids who are very talented but haven't had that opportunity? So generational progress is, I think, what we're thinking about. And then very quickly on climate change, something I feel deeply passionately about. I think it would be irresponsible for any leader not to have an agenda on being positively able to impact climate change. So we have made a bold goal that we will be net carbon positive by 2050. I know that's a long time away, but we have near-term goals, as you would expect, by 2025, to go all green, have more plant-based products, have more climate-friendly food, and we're very, very intentional about that, and very focused on ensuring that we're doing our bit, because I really see that as an existential threat. Climate changes and diversity inclusion, I think, is so important for us to mirror that as an example to others in the country, that it can be done, it must be done.
That is inspiring. What certainly your goals with regard to being carbon neutral in a company that uses a heck of a lot of energy to produce what you produce. It's really interesting. I'm reminded by one of the questioners in the chat that this is the National Association of Corporate Directors program. And Larry Weiss has posed an interesting question related to you and your boards. Larry, would you like to come on screen and ask the question yourself, or do you want me to pose it?
Sure, Kathy. Yeah, happy to ask it. So yeah, I was just wondering, it's been a weird year or 2 years, and some of the things that we used to talk about from a risk management perspective as highly unlikely or black swan events, we seem to be seeing more black swans than we used to. And so with all of the volatility in the world, and the increasing frequency with which you see these sorts of unlikely but high impact events occurring, how have you changed or recalibrated how you and your boards talk about risk management?
Well, Larry, in around some topics, I guess, but we're in the risk management business, so our general mantra is expect the best, plan for the worst, and make sure that we're flexible. So certainly, while many things unexpected have happened, certainly our approach to risk management at CORE, hasn't really changed, other than just been reinforced in this moment. That stance and a consideration really of a wider array of possibilities. Probably the one subject that has really received more emphasis than before is really around reputational risk. With respect to, how are we engaging with our employees? How are we supporting our employees? How are we supporting the community? Things that we've always cared about, but now we're much more mindful. And I think companies generally are much more mindful about the reputational risks associated with this environment. Again, I think that that's a good thing. I think more and more companies are becoming much more aware that they've got to lean into these issues in a very meaningful and tangible way, in a way that sets specific goals, publishes them and holds themselves accountable and allows others to hold them accountable to it too. I think that's going to make a better economy and society for sure, particularly if businesses work together in that regard. But with that, there's a lot of pressure on the board, on the CEO, on the team generally, to really deliver on those commitments, demonstrate progress in a very measurable and meaningful way. So again, I think a lot of the topics and the approach for us is the same, but again, around certain areas like reputational risk, certainly they have heightened during this time.
Yeah, I would echo what Bob said, Larry. Again, we are in 180 countries and in a highly regulated environment. So, fundamentally, there was an institutional competency and know-how and knowledge around business risk management. But I think, historically, we always, from a technology provider perspective, you were always in the background, right, in terms of providing skits, assays, tools to researchers and clinicians. The pandemic sort of brought us front and center with the public-private partnerships that we've had with governmental institutions across the world. And along with that, the exposure that has come with it, and reputational risk, as Bob pointed out, has moved up in the top three. I would say, how do you manage that? And I think that heightened awareness around reputational risk is is here to stay.
Yeah.
Niren.
Yeah, I think a very important question, Larry, and especially in this remote world, so I think I agree with what Bob and Prahlad said. So I'll just add what is maybe uniquely applicable to us. So apart from reputational risk and how we treat our people, I think we are positively paranoid. Is our approach to enterprise risk management is to be positively paranoid is around IT, data security. I don't know, the attempts to actually hack into the system have grown at least 30 to 40 times during the pandemic. And it's the onslaught is just absolutely insane. So I think just making sure that we are safe on that front, I think, is critical. And then finally, I think food safety, with all the supply chain disruptions that we're having, there's so much chaos that is going on in trying to just make do, just making sure that we're never lowering the bar on our quality and food safety, etc. Those are some additional areas that we're being positively paranoid about.
Let me turn now to Diane Hessen, who's posed a really interesting question in the chat, taking us a little bit into the political arena, not surprisingly. But Diane?
Hi, everybody. Thank you for such a great conversation. So I'm curious, I'll just read what I wrote. Last spring, hundreds of CEOs came out to take a stand against what they saw as restrictive voting laws in Georgia and elsewhere. And there are lots of other examples lately of CEOs just kind of, taking these kinds of stands. Corporations used to be reluctant to do that with political issues, but this activism is now on the rise. And I know it's a huge issue in the boardroom. So how do you all think about this? And to what extent do you feel that your companies have a responsibility to speak up on the issues of the day?
Well, Diane, as you know, because Diane's a member of our board of directors, and so you're in those conversations all the time. And we've had a growing advocacy platform for a number of years around particular issues. So this is not a new behavior for us. It certainly has received a lot of focus as we've become a public company, and how does that work in that environment? And we believe it works as well or better in some ways than it did before. And I think there's a greater need for CEOs to speak out and lean in on a number of issues. But the thing that we always think about is on which ones, and where is it relevant to us? And under the mantra of right and smart, there's a bunch of things that are the right thing to do. You got to find the connection in terms of how does it consistent and synergistic with your business? Where do you really have some level of insight or resources around this issue? And there's a number of things about which I and many others here feel very passionately about that we've not spoken up on, simply because we haven't seen enough of a connection to our business. We're also mindful as a company is good size and growing, but not very big, 1,900 employees, that we only have the bandwidth to lean in on so many things. So to do those credibly and well, we've got to make sure we have the resources to have a sustained commitment. We also have to make sure they're credible, that we've really done the work behind them. I think one of the unfortunate things is too many businesses and leaders have taken sort of a check the box virtue signaling approach to advocacy on too many things. And I believe if you advocate for everything, you advocate for nothing. So for us, it's all been around that balancing act on, what issue at what moment relative to what's consistent with our values and our business.
Niren and Prahlad, I'd really like to get your perspective on what it's like to be activist as a corporate leader in other countries, in addition to the United States.
Sure. So, Diane, good to see you, and you're on our board as well.
How lucky am I?
As are we. So I think I feel that it has to be authentic. Advocacy has to be authentic. And for it to be authentic, it has to first kind of align with who we are as a brand and what we stand for and what our values are, and the pillars on which we want to take leadership. So as I just shared, if it is to do with diversity and inclusion, if it is to do with climate change, if it is to do with wellness or good eating and accessibility to food, I think all of those areas are areas that we feel passionately about. We have credibility to lean in on them, and therefore we can be advocates and take a position. I also feel that if you advocate for everything, you advocate for nothing. So you have to be very purposeful, very deliberate, and very aligned with who you are and how you want to show up as a corporate.
Does that work in other countries as it's sort of beginning to work here?
Yeah, I would say that principle generally is true, because we as a brand have the same values, the same ethos, irrespective of the geography in which we operate, and we would therefore have the same mindset. Of course, in some countries, it is okay to be an advocate, and it is not okay to be. You don't want to be an advocate because it is not accepted. So you have to be sensitive to the political realities of where you operate. And you might express that in different ways, in ways in which it can be heard. So I think in the US, fortunately, we're in an open society, and I think we can advocate that, quite publicly. In some other countries, less so. But I think you have to find your own way of making sure that your voice is being heard in an appropriate fashion for the culture in which you operate.
Prahlad, are you seeing it easier or more difficult across a wide range of countries that you're in to be an advocate?
No, Diane, great question, and I'm feeling left out given that you're already on both Niren and Bob. But what we've tried to do, not just whether it's in the US or any country or any region, we operate in 180 countries. Our philosophy has been that live by your core values. And two of our core values are passion for people and do the right thing always. And and I think Bob said it very well. You have to be authentic to yourself. You have to be able to operate in a manner as a leader and be able to do what you would do on a personal front as you would on a professional front. And I think that's the philosophy I personally, and fortunately my board has endorsed, our board has endorsed it, is, you advocate for the things that make the biggest impact and one that you passionately believe. And if you have 14,000 employees that are all across the globe, irrespective in sometimes what the pressure or the impact could be, you have to stand up for it. And there are countries where you might have not as friendly a government or not as open a society, and you have to walk a fine line there. But your employees expect you to raise a voice And then I think, without going into specific examples where you should or you shouldn't, I think it has to be a balanced approach.
Fabulous. Thank you, Diane. Great question. And we really didn't just look at Diane's bio to pick the speakers here. Anyway, I think we've hit about all of the items in the chat. One issue in particular did come up a couple of times, and I think you've all hit on it in different ways, but maybe it's a good way to kind of sum up. You all seem to be really focused on your business going forward, being transformative, being transformed, the use of technology and so forth. And you've all talked about how the lessons you've learned about treating people in the ways that they want to be dealt with, whether they're coming to work every day or they're working from home, obviously both coming to work every day, but where they're able to work. There is this continuing issue that I think Niren brought up most graphically between the number of jobs that are available and the number of people out there that seem to be looking for jobs, and there's a big gap. How are you thinking about labor shortages now and in the future? You've talked a lot about technological change. It's got to be a driver of that. And you've talked a lot about learning how to treat people better and more effectively. Do you see that really solving your problems with labor shortages, or are they here to stay? Anybody jump in?
Yeah, certainly to some degree, I guess they're here to stay in some form or fashion because they've always existed, although I think there's lots of ways we can make them less. While recognizing they're rising, right? A lot of folks in hospitality industries and others where demand is down are joining the ranks of what could be the permanently unemployed. And we need to do something. And I think that's a great opportunity for us. As I think about some of the things that we're working on through our foundation in the advocacy arena, and again with others, is really this whole issue of how do we help address that? Not because we're trying to solve our own particular employment challenges, but really those of our customers and those throughout the economy, on whose success we depend as a community bank. And I do think, and many business leaders have long recognized this, and a number are leaning into it right now, is we've got to find a more integrated and direct path, leveraging our community colleges, institutions like Ben Franklin Institute, our Voc Tech schools, to really develop the skills that employers really need and develop commitments from those employers to help fund those efforts and take those employees. I do think that while that process has happened organically and in some ways in a direct way over many years, I think it's an opportunity for us, certainly here in our region, but throughout the economy, to really lean in, make some investments. And again, I think it's not only a way to solve labor shortages, but it addresses the racial and gender inequities that exist. If you look at folks that are in lower paid jobs, typically in service industries, they tend to be people of color and women disproportionately. We can help solve and identify and develop a lot of the talent that we're looking for in some of these higher skilled positions that we're unable to fill by really leaning in on that. And again, I think that that is a tremendous opportunity that with the help and support of government, and those in the nonprofit sector that actually do that work every day, we have a real opportunity to help address those things.
Niren, Prahlad?
Yeah, so, our purpose at Panera, Prahlad, there's an overlap with what you said. You said healthier world. So at Panera, our purpose is for a healthier and happier world. And happier because of the craveability of the food that we serve, and healthier because of our impact agenda. And I think against that, our people value proposition is that healthier and happier from the inside out. So we can only deliver on that ambition of the company if our people also feel healthier and happier. And therefore, our desire to be a company that, holds itself accountable for the general wellness and the well-being of our associates. So that's the value proposition. Our metaphor that I like to think of is that we want Panera to be a school of life for our employees. They come in, they may not be here with us forever, but they should be really glad that our paths crossed, that Panera made them better humans, better leaders because of how we treated them and how we invested in them. And they may go on to do better things or different things and chase their dreams, but we will in some way make a difference in the lives of those who come in contact with Panera Bread. So we are massively maniacally focused on that, and we want to be recognized as the best place to work in food retail. Having said that, I don't think that the employee labor shortage pressure is going to go away structurally. As you know, the workforce looks for different options, perhaps don't want to work in food retail, etc. And therefore, I think we'll always be scrambling, given our ambition of growth, etc., to be able to feed the need that we have. And therefore, I think one of the other things we're looking at is automation and saying, okay, how can we completely flip this operating model on its head and deploy our human skills and human interaction where it matters most in terms of the contact with our guests, and some other more repetitive tasks that are there in our cafes, can we automate them? And can we automate them so that we drive greater efficiency and also are able to take care of the associates who end up working with us much better, than we would otherwise, because we can afford to. So those are some of the ways in which we're thinking of more holistically what the value proposition is, and then how do we reshape the operating model as we go forward.
Prahlad, bring us home.
Cathy, it's such an interesting question and a topic. From a Perkin Elmer perspective, we are actually living through this cultural change. Our employee profile was one of a male, white male in his late 50s, mid to late 50s, scientists, staring into an instrument. And that has changed to a female in the late 20s or early 30s, staring at a chromosome or a DNA. We are in the midst of this cultural shift. And I think it's imperative upon us as a company, but more importantly, as a society, as I said earlier, right? How do we go early on in the process to ensure that we encourage STEM among a diverse population, go to high schools, go to undergrads, and be able to develop talent, because that's where the hotbed for talent is. It's not going to be competing against our peers to poach talent from each other. This has to be a grassroots effort, it's to something that Bob pointed out that he's very passionate about and working on. And then I think that's what's going to make us successful in the long run. So again, hopefully we'll get there.
Now, I want to thank the three of you enormously. This has been a fascinating program. We're getting comments in the chat about they wish they had another half an hour with you. So I'm not sure you wish that, but yeah, the audience does. Let me turn this back to Beth Boland.
Thank you all. I mean, really, to our panelists, you were incredible. And what struck me so much as I was listening is three very different industries, but the issues, and especially the talent management, the innovation issues, are almost all the same. I remember in one of our prior panels, we had a very prominent speaker who said, what we really are is a culture of people who, are dedicated to our mission, who happen to provide banking services for that particular one. And that really struck me as I was listening to you today. We thank you for your vision, for your innovation, for your articulation of those values, and really appreciate it. Thank you all for coming today. I want to highlight some of our upcoming panel programs that we are going to have, unfortunately still all remote through the fall. On October 14th, do you know what customers expect from your company? We talked about that quite a bit today. On October 28th, really important and salient issue on digital currency. We're going to have as one of the speakers, the primary speaker, the head of digital currency for the Fed. So a great authority on that issue. on November 17th, the role of the board on human capital management. Again, you know, top of the line topic that we were discussing today. And on December 16th, supply chain disruption. And January 11th of next year, ESG. So as you can tell from the topics, these are all top of mind for directors today and couldn't be more important issues. So we hope to see you all virtually on each of those programs and to participate in those discussions. Great job today from the attendees in populating with questions and then verbalizing your questions to the panel. And we will see you at our next program. In the meantime, look for the survey that you will be getting, and please do fill that out. We do pay attention to those. So thank everybody again, our attendees, and especially our speakers and Cathy for a wonderful moderation. We'll see you in a few weeks at our next program.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye, everybody. Thank
Bye.
you so much.